All right. Well, thank you, Ed. I think I'm here. I'm here because of the windstorm. I was at a meeting last December where hospital executives kind of sit around the room and share stories, and so it came to be my turn around the room. And the most recent thing on my mind in December was the windstorm and how we had reacted to that. And Ed was there, and there had been a presentation at that meeting by Region 9. So they had asked, how people had fared in the windstorm. So pretty fresh on my mind. And then after the meeting, we had a chance to talk about another disaster that I had been involved in. I had done an interim role as a CEO at a 110-bed rural hospital in Alabama. And just about, let's see, about a week or so after I got there, Hurricane Ivan was coming through. So here I am, originally from Spokane. I've been around the country, but I spent the first 38 years of my life in Spokane, personally and professionally. And I thought I came from an area where we don't have too many disasters except for Mount St. Helens. Obviously, there are a lot of disasters, but nothing that like a hurricane or a tornado, which both scared the heck out of me because I'd never experienced that. So I thought, well, these folks at this rural hospital have been through hurricanes before. They've been through Hurricane Pearl and other sorts of hurricanes, and I thought they'll know what to do. I'd always had my plan in place, at the hospitals, but I really found that my skills, as a person who had to put together environment of care plans was very helpful. A couple of things I learned from that experience was don't assume people have a plan in place, A, and B, you remember that the community looks at our facilities as a place to come. So all of a sudden we had all these folks coming in from the community assuming that the hospital was going to house them. So you've got winds blowing 70 miles an hour outside, you've got roofs blowing off the medical buildings outside of your hospital, and you've got people coming in wanting sanctuary. So what I had to do was to set up a system where I at least had security. So we put armbands on everyone and gave them a designated area to be. But thinking about that component, as a disaster, even though you may not even be designated by the local folks as the sanctuary, but people will self-locate. So that was one of the areas. The other areas was loss of communication. And so just the fact that you tell people, we're going to huddle every 1 hour in this location and see what's happening. Then we're going to huddle every 2 hours, or we're going to huddle every 3 hours. The only thing I had was my cell phone. And again, this is 2004, so there weren't a lot of cell phones out there. But I had to, maintain the battery without any kind of electricity, and we were like that for several days. The third thing was really getting the employees to come to work. And because obviously there was a lot of damage, so we set up a child care center. And some of the folks that got assigned child care, they were the real heroes. If you can imagine doing child care for a whole shift. So those were just, it's sort of thinking on the fly, but using the skills that you have and not assuming that because you're in an area where people may have experienced floods or hurricanes or whatever it might be, that they have a disaster plan that's gonna meet the need. So one of the things that I was asked to do was to talk about the who, what, where, and when of Eastern State Hospitals. So we always enjoy the opportunity to do that. I want to make sure this is going to work. Okay. So how many in this room are in mental health? I see this is a mental health day, so quite a few, but the majority of you may not specifically be in mental health. And so you'll hear us talk about something called the recovery model. So Eastern State Hospital subscribes to the recovery model. It's evolving. It comes from our national organization called SAMHSA. But the mission of the Department of Social and Health Services is to transform lives by supporting and sustaining recovery wellness. Now at Eastern State Hospital, You know, our goal is to help people function at the highest level possible, whether that might be lifelong hospitalization or it's a return to the community. So it's individualized and designed for our patients. I always like to put this historical picture up because, you know, it just is so amazing that the hospital has been there since 1891. And you may not be able to read the script on the bottom, but this was considered an extremely nice piece of architecture at the time. And it was actually called the Washington Hospital for the Insane, Eastern Washington Hospital for the Insane. And that was common nomenclature in 1891. It was the second hospital in the state, coming after Western State Hospital had been built in Steilacoom. And Western State Hospital was bursting at the seams, and so they needed to build a second state hospital. And that's how we came to be. It's amazing that it was built for $160,000. It's also amazing that there were several sites that were selected, Spokane being one of them, but Medical Lake was the final decision because the land was donated, and the lake at that time was believed to have medicinal qualities. But in 1984, a new building went up, and that's referred to as West Lake. So it's about 3/4 of a mile away from the brick structure that you see when you drive up the hill. And then in 2008, we repurposed an activity therapy building, and that building is used during the daytime to provide what we refer to as active treatment or activities for the patient. Now in 2017, we will add a PICU. So if I come back, I'll be able to talk to you about a psychiatric intensive care unit that will be going in 2017. So just in terms of how do we all fit, you know, I report to the Assistant Secretary for the Department of Social and Health Services, that's Carla Riaz, and then Carla reports to the Secretary for the Department of Social and Health Services, who is Patricia Lastway. Some of you may know her. You can see, if you go back to that slide, we are actually 317 beds. We've recently expanded from our previous 287 beds to 317. If you look at what we do, without Eastern, we would not be able to take care of long-term patients with civil or criminal history. So our primary mission is to care for patients long-term. We partner with our behavioral health partners to provide the community piece of care for the mentally ill, and our goal is to care for them longer term. There is no other facility on this side of the state that does that. We serve 20 counties, so think about that. Everything east of the Cascades we serve. In fact, last week we toured Othello. We made visits to Colville, Republic. We went to Omak, visiting many of our partners and hearing some of their stories about the difficulty of caring for patients in those rural facilities. This particular slide is really just to show you, and it'll give you a feel for how we care for the patients and where we care for them. We have 3 distinct areas of care. We have the forensic side of things, where we care for patients who are long-term placed there by the courts, the criminally ill. And then we have another section where we care for the civil patients. This section in the middle, the forensic side, is where we care for patients who are not guilty by reason of insanity. This is where we actually provide competency restoration and competency evaluation. On the GPU side, we care for those patients over the age of 50 who have mental illness. Some of them will return to the community. Some of them will be there longer term. We also have a 10-bed habilitative mental health ward, which cares for people with dual diagnosis, mental illness, as well as disabilities. So it's a complex. Now, this is the area right here. This is about 2/3 of our population. This is about 1/3 of our population. This population is located 3/4 of a mile from the main brick building. Just a little bit of statistics to throw in here. We have over 780 employees. We also operate on about 1,000 total acres, just to give you a feel for our size. Our admissions, on any typical day, we have around 300 patients in-house, but we have pretty good turnover for a mental health population with, you can see, 622 admissions, 628 discharges. That's because we do a lot of evaluation and treatment, 72-hour and 14-day treatment.
Facilities.
So what happened on November the 17th at our hospital, our 1,000 acres, and our 300 patients? Well, on November the 17th, we had a great day planned because that was the day that we were actually going to move patients from one side of the brick building to the other side of the brick building. It's where 2/3 of our patients are. We had just renovated a ward. Some of you have read about the True Blood lawsuit in the newspaper. And we had renovated a ward in order to move NGRI patients into a new setting so that we could then complete the construction in the area where they were housed to bring in more competency restoration patients with a net gain of 30 beds. So November the 17th, we had movers there. We had people there from the Department of Corrections to help us do some moving from one building to another. We had staff decked out. I was there in jeans that day, and we were ready to make that move. And the wind started blowing in the morning. A few of those of you may recall, it started blowing. I thought, boy, windy day. They did say it was going to be windy today. Pretty high wind. Then by the afternoon, we had everything moved. The patients had been all moved to the activity treatment center because keep in mind that for people with long-term mental illness, a move from one setting to another is a major. They're changing everything they know. And they had been anticipating this for 2 or 3 weeks. There was no way to delay it. We had to make a decision to move forward. So by the time the furniture had been moved, because the same beds that were in Building A were moving to Building B. And so we got the patients moved, but about the time we got them all moved, the lights went out. So, and we lost power. So that's November the 17th is a day that we will remember. This is, you can see from this slide, you can see the nice new area that they were moving towards. And there was a lot of anticipation, a lot of teamwork that had gone into getting ready for this. So what was the direct impact to us? And that's really, I think, what you guys are interested in. I mean, we had a loss of power at the for 2/3 of our patients in the main building. All we had was emergency power to serve our forensic patients as well as our civil patient population. We had power at our Westlake location, or our geriatric unit, 3/4 of a mile down the road. So we were concerned, of course, and having been in disasters before where we may have lost electricity in a monsoon or something like that, I assumed that the hospital would be one of the first to come back on. And it took over almost 3 days, 64 hours to be exact, for our power to come back on. So we didn't appear to be afforded the same priority as maybe other hospitals, and that's something we'll be working with our electrical provider on. But so you see, we lost computers. We had no computers except for in the main building. So medical record staff could not work. Our finance offices folks could not work. We lost radio communications totally. Because we didn't have a backup power supply for our radios, for our new digital radios that had gone in. And then when we went around to the wards, we found that some of them had flashlights, some of them did not. And then we also found that those who did, the batteries didn't work. So, so we scurried around, got to supply house, got more batteries. People ran and got flashlights and batteries. But those are just some basic things that you would you think about at the time of a disaster. Now, in terms of what was the impact to our employees, I'm sure all of you experienced much of the same. We had employee after employee come in and say, a tree fell on my house, but they were still there. A tree fell on my car. A tree fell on my pickup truck. I mean, it was just incredible the number of people we had who had damage to their homes or who themselves were without power. Many of our employees were without power after we were restored, as you well know. So we had limited food. We had folks working extra shifts to be able to cover our patient needs, and we couldn't allow our patients to wash their clothes or take showers because our water supply was supported by a generator. And you know as well as I do that generators are short-term power sources. And so we had to watch the well, because if the well went down too far, then we'd be on fire watch. And being on fire watch required even more staff, of which we were short of. So in terms of patient care, you know, the decreased lighting and moving into this new ward or the other wards, we had some emergency lighting along in the hallways, but the patient bedrooms themselves had no lighting. Now, keep in mind, you know, I'm in a facility that we have to look at security. We have to make sure that people aren't harming themselves, patient safety, employee safety on a regular basis with limited lighting. We also lacked hot water in the kitchen food preparation area, but our folks were very creative. Our elevators were down. Our staff were extremely creative in that they made stacked lunches for the employees and delivered them. They created other food options to take to the patients on the wards. We encouraged those who could to come to a central dining area, but it was very challenging, but created a lot of teamwork. So what went well? You know, during times of disaster, people come together, and it was incredible the number of people who came into work despite their own personal damage. Those folks who didn't have computer access made great runners. They could deliver messages. They could do things that we didn't have staff typically assigned to do. So they stepped up and performed those tasks. We did not give them time off away from work. Our public information officer created flyers that were delivered 3/4 of a mile away, as well as to all the wards with any updates of what was happening, what was coming on, what was going off, etc. The incident demand team, we conducted a minimum of twice-a-day huddles to let people know what was going on. And then once the power was restored, we actually provided employees the shower capability at the hospital, since they hadn't been able to do that at home. So there were many things that went well, but we also learned a lot from this exercise. If I haven't mentioned any of those things. Yeah, one of the interesting things we had to do was to monitor the reservoir levels of our well. I mentioned that a little bit, but we actually were concerned that our generators were going to run down, and so we had one almost ready to come over from Olympia to help us through that shutdown. So we found things that were not on emergency power. I've talked to you already about our radios. Our heat exchangers did not have backup power. Our technology closets did not have backup power. And I've talked a little bit about the flashlight. So our to-dos out of this is just to make sure people understand what we do at Eastern State Hospital, that we do have fragile patients. We have patients with serious mental illness as well as geriatric patients, and we want to make sure folks understand what we do so that our power is restored as timely as possible. We're increasing our lighting capability secondary to more generators. We have backup power now for our radios. We have backup powers for for the IT closets, and we have added hot water to our cafeteria area so that even in the dark they can prepare food. Emergency lighting was also placed in the cafeteria because they were working with flashlights. And then just looking at roles for the Emergency Operations Center, you know, do we have people in the right places doing the right things during an emergency? So all told, you know, we were, you know, everybody was experiencing a disaster at this time, and for me personally, to see our staff come in and to see them work as hard as they did as a team, and then for us to take what we learned and improve upon it, is really, to me, what disaster preparedness is about. It's always about improving our performance. So I would entertain any questions. Am I at my 15 minutes? Okay, okay. So I would entertain any questions if that's allowed. Yes, Tamara. Oh, I'm going to repeat the question. And I think the question was, have we been able to mitigate some of the risks, I'm paraphrasing, around the outages that we identified? And the answer to your question is yes. We now have backup for the radios. We have more generator power. And so we have backup for the radios, and we have backup for the technology closets as well. We have been able to we've put in emergency lighting in our food preparation area because they were trying to do that with flashlights. And so we have been able to mitigate quite a bit of what we learned. And we're still working on some. And we also, the other thing is that we make sure that now we have somebody responsible for checking on flashlights and batteries on a regular basis. And so that used to be a ward responsibility, and now it's been delegated to security as part of their routine. Too much change for wards to remember to do that. And let me introduce Sharon Mandarino in the back. Sharon Mandarino was a star during all of this. It's like, where's Sharon? Where's Sharon? What's happening? Sharon probably could do this presentation far better than I can, but she's boots on the ground 24 hours a day during a disaster, and very, very commendable.